Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
Welcome to the Daybreak Asia podcast. I'm Doug Krisner. It certainly is all about earnings, and the focus is Megacap tech after results from SK Hynix, Alphabet, and Tesla. Plus, the intrigue over President Xi Jinping's future will not cease. Bloomberg opinion columnist Karishma Vaswani says it's the result of a succession crisis of Xi's own making. We'll check in with her momentarily. But as promised, we begin with those big tech earnings. Early on Thursday, the Korean chipmaker SK Hynix reported record operating profit for the second quarter. The $6.7 billion haul was driven by the company's dominance in high-bandwidth memory chips. Revenue, $16.1 billion. That was 8% higher than projections. Here in the States, Alphabet beat Wall Street expectations for second quarter revenue. However, shares were down after the tech giant warned of higher spending ahead. The Google parent posted sales of $81.7 billion, excluding partner payouts, but capital expenditures are forecast to hit $85 billion in 2025. That would be up from $75 billion the company previously forecast. Mandeep Singh is senior tech analyst at Bloomberg Intelligence.
1/3 of their business is cloud and YouTube, and that's still growing north of 25%. So to my mind, they are showing ROI on all that AI spend. And if they have more AI infrastructure capacity, the cloud business would be growing even faster.
That is Mandeep Singh from Bloomberg Intelligence. And last but not least, Tesla's second quarter results fell short of Wall Street estimates. Revenue was down by 12% for the quarter compared to last year, to $22.5 billion. That is the sharpest sales decline for Tesla in over a decade. And facing the prospect of lost incentives from the United States, CEO Elon Musk issued this warning on the earnings call.
We probably could have a few rough quarters. I'm not saying we will, but we could.
That is Elon Musk. And for a closer look at the Tesla story, we heard from Michael Dunne, CEO at Dunne Insights. He spoke with Bloomberg TV host Shery and Haidi Stroud-Watts.
How much of one's view on Tesla and Elon Musk, by extension, depends on whether you see this as a straightforward auto company or an AI and robotics company? And is that sort of through different lens that you would have seen these results plus the warning?
Yes, 100% difference depending on how you see the company. So a year ago, Elon Musk was talking about extreme capacity, building 20 million EVs a year. He doesn't talk about that anymore. He looked down the road at EVs and said, I don't want to try to compete with the Chinese on EVs and price. I'm going a different direction, wide open highway called robo-taxis and autonomy. That's where he's taken all of his chips and placed them on that bet. Robo-taxis today in Austin, very soon in places like London, Sydney, Paris, Rome, Los Angeles. So it's all about AI and robotics, and you'll hear him talk less and less about batteries and electric cars.
And you're still saying that there's very few that would dare bet against Elon Musk, even in this uncertain leadership and regulatory environment, right? There's still plenty of concerns recently revived when it comes to how much sort of political distraction he has at the moment.
When you think about it, it's almost amazing that Tesla sold any cars in the most recent quarter. He's managed to upset both Republicans and Democrats here in the United States. Germans I talked to in Europe, no, we're done with Tesla. In China, he's surrounded by formidable competitors like Xiaomi, Li Auto, NIO, and others, Xpeng. So the company's definitely under pressure, and he's done the company no favors on the public relations front. But never underestimate Tesla's ability to surprise to the upside. Through AI, through technology breakthroughs, customers are still buying the cars despite all of this friction.
When it comes to capital, free cash flow, when it comes to really the performance and just metrics, how much of a dent will it make that the incentives like the EV tax credits are expected to go away?
This hurts. No doubt about it. And if Elon Musk says differently, well, we'd have to discount those words because, number one, on tariffs, there's a $300 million hit. And number two, EV tax credits are definitely an incentive, especially here in the United States, for people who are on the fence to say, yeah, let me try an EV because I'm going to get the tax credit. That's going away. And that hurts Tesla. But by extension, it also hurts all other automakers in the space. So for that reason, one has to remain still slightly optimistic about Tesla's chances, just because Elon Musk is a once in a million years kind of entrepreneur, and he's in SpaceX and he's in XAI. He's doing a lot of things, and it feels like he's a few steps ahead of us. So that's why the stock is still valued up around $1 trillion, much higher than any other automaker, including Toyota, which makes amazing profits that dwarf Tesla's today. So investors are still holding their ground, saying, yeah, we're going to give Elon benefit of the doubt, even though current sales outlook is not strong.
You mentioned Toyota. The stock did phenomenally well after we saw that 15% tariff agreement with the United States. How much of a difference does this make for Japanese car makers, especially when it comes to relative competitive edge against other car makers in other regions?
Yeah, Toyota and others are popping the champagne today in Japan because they're just delighted with the outcome. You know, keep in mind, Japan sells millions of cars into the United States every year. The U.S. sells a few thousand back into Japan. So the Japanese negotiators would have been worried. Are they going to slam the door shut? Are they going to hit us with super high tariffs? That was not the outcome. And as a result, Toyota and Honda and other Japanese automakers are feeling really good today.
Michael Dunne, really good to have you with us, CEO of Dunne Insights.
Welcome back to the Daybreak Asia podcast. I'm Doug Krisner. It's time to check in with Bloomberg Opinion. Columnist Karishma Vaswani has been writing about how the rumors in China about the political elite are not dying. I'm pleased to say she joins us now. Karishma, it's always a pleasure. Thank you so very much for making the time to chat with me. And I know that this is an extremely sensitive topic. What is the most important thing to bear in mind when discussing the ruling class in China?
Well, I think the most important thing to bear in mind when we have a discussion about China's political elite is that historically, hearsay about how the Politburo, the inner workings of the Politburo, there's been a long tradition of that being wholly inaccurate. You know, we've had rumors come out from time to time predicting X, Y, and Z about the future of certain political figures within the Chinese Communist Party. And for the most part, 99% of the time they've been wrong. And one really striking example comes to mind back in 2011, when a Hong Kong TV station reported mistakenly that the former Chinese president Jiang Zemin had died. And that was actually 11 years before his actual death in 2022. And I think the reason behind these kinds of, I make that point because of the fact that there is so little that we do know about what's going on in the inner workings of the Chinese Communist Party, that when these rumors come out, people are quick to sort of, circulate them. There's a lot of Chinese whispers, forgive the pun, and there are a lot of conclusions drawn about what is happening. But they've pretty much always been inaccurate.
Can you help me understand how this speculation kind of fits in with the notion that President Xi has been for a while very involved in kind of anti-corruption? We know the big campaign that was put in place a couple of years back. I think it's continuing always. Help me understand the context.
Yeah, so, the intrigue over President Xi Jinping and what he does in China is no less speculative. But there are a few things that we are able to decipher. The other aspect of this, of course, is the fact that there's no clear succession plan in place as of now. And I think that also creates an atmosphere of uncertainty, which allows for more of these rumors to circulate. But specifically, to do with the anti-corruption drive that he's put in place during his tenure, I think one of the things that really struck me was the quick succession of sort of the defense ministers that have fallen foul of these new regulations or sort of new norms. I think it would be a better way to describe that. And we've seen stories about the trouble in the sort of higher echelons of Chinese power. And the biggest consequence of that is an indication that Xi Jinping's power has in fact cemented, because he is getting rid of people, apparently, at least from what we can see, that he appears to deem not productive or not consequential to the way he wants to run the country, and in particular the defense forces. So I think what you can draw from that is that his power is actually growing. For the most part. And I think that's a really important takeaway from what we've seen in terms of the political ramifications and consequences of the inner workings of the Politburo.
So back in March 2018, as you well know, the National People's Congress approved the removal of that 2-year term limit on the presidency, and that effectively allowed President Xi to remain in power for life. Is that a part of the story as well, do you think?
Yes, absolutely. And, at every stage, Xi Jinping has defied convention to solidify his grip. Some analysts that I've been speaking to, long-term China watchers, there's a phrase that I thought was particularly apt for this conversation, and that the consensus is that he will likely rule China until he goes to meet Marx, which means basically until he meets his maker. And what has been really evident is that he's been successful in doing this, which goes to show that the alliances that he's made or the people that he's removed from power, at every stage, the strategy has appeared to have worked. And that's despite the fact that, the economy has been in a weak spot. That's despite the fact that he is fighting this trade war with Donald Trump, and that, people in the country are definitely feeling the impact of what higher tariffs could mean for them and their businesses. He seems to have consistently just been able to cement and solidify his grip on power, even going so far as to rule past the retirement age of 68, ignoring previous norms that have indicated leaders of that age or older should retire.
So that's a great point. Do we need to consider his age in this? And I'm wondering whether we need to also consider what the aspirations are of the next generation.
It's hard to say at this moment, given the fact that all of these rumors are still circulating. One of the things that I found really interesting in my research for this column was the fact that there's been a revival of the Cold War era practice of something called Pekingology, which is effectively just reading the tea leaves from the party's inner circle. And people that are, based in China will tell you as well that reporting on what's going on there has become a bit of sort of a black box, because it's so hard to decipher or to get concrete information about what's happening on the ground. But I think what that shows is that we will continue to have these sorts of rumors going forward. And for the most part, none of them will be true.
Can you give me a sense of how this is being presented to citizens in China vis-a-vis state media?
Yeah, sure. If you look at how Xi Jinping is presented in state media, there is a cult of personality that is obvious that they're trying to create around him, and it's been very, very effective. So much so that when he starts to disappear, or there's a perceived absence of his in state media, international media tends to draw conclusions about that. But there's been an interesting study by the China Media Project assessing whether or not he really had been downplayed in government publications recently. And the answer actually is that, according to their reporting, that not only does he remain dominant, but there are no signs of advancement by any member of the Politburo Standing Committee. And what I think this shows is just how much of a big figure he continues to remain in state media, and that cult of personality that I was talking about, which is then parlayed to citizens in China.
So one of the things that you touched on a moment ago was the trade war that's going on right now with the United States. And I'm wondering how this has impacted the feeling of nationalism in China, and whether that is kind of intersecting a little bit with what we're talking about.
Yeah, it is, in the sense that it's been used highly effectively, both in some of the rhetoric that you hear from Xi Jinping, but also other officials and in state media when describing the trade war with the United States. I think the language has been pretty firm, like we're not going to stand down. We're going to defend our rights against what the United States has often been called a bully in the state media and the official language there. And I think what that does is definitely create a sense of national pride on the part of Chinese citizens, because they And it's a familiar narrative, right? The narrative that the United States is trying to keep China down, that it's trying to stop its rise. That feeds into what Xi Jinping has consistently said about how the East is rising and the West is in decline. And I think that's a very useful narrative at a time when the Chinese economy perhaps isn't in the strongest position or as strong as it has been in the past. Everybody always needs a bad guy. And in this situation, the U.S. is a very convenient bad guy.
Karishma, we'll leave it there. Thank you so very much. Bloomberg opinion columnist Karishma Vaswani joining us here on the Daybreak Asia podcast. Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Bloomberg Daybreak Asia Edition podcast. Each weekday, we look at the stories shaping markets, finance, and geopolitics in the Asia Pacific. You can find us on Apple, Spotify, the Bloomberg Podcast YouTube channel, or anywhere else you listen. Join us again tomorrow for insight on the market moves from Hong Kong to Singapore and Australia. I'm Doug Krisner, and this is Bloomberg.